I anticipate we'll have a fairly short meeting today. We'll just be hearing one bill, which is HB 30, which is to observe daylight saving time all year. We've received emails both for and against this bill. My office will collect those emails and provide that to committee for review by the next meeting. But without further ado, Representative Ortiz and staff, Ms. Liz Harpole, would you please come forward, put yourself on the record, and begin your presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I am Representative Dan Ortiz, representing District 1, Southern Southeast Alaska.
And thank you for the record, Liz Harpole, staff 2, Rep. Ortiz.
Thank you again, Chair McCormick and members of the committee for getting up this early to hear the Daylight Savings Bill. House Bill 30. House Bill 30 establishes daylight savings time year-round. Daylight savings time is observed between the second Sunday of March and the first Sunday of November, or the time we are currently in. The way this bill works, for example, we would spring forward one last time and then never fall back to standard time in the fall time. If we were to adopt a year-round daylight savings time and the East Coast did not, we would be only 3 hours behind during the winter months and would have the regular 4-hour time difference during the summer months. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to note that this legislature almost a decade ago heard a bill to keep us on standard time. The bill was also a time change bill, but that's where the similarities end. This bill would keep us on daylight savings time year round. There are many benefits to staying on daylight savings time. Your packet includes 4 studies showing some of these benefits. In summary, studies show that it would bring about increased physical activity, a decrease in robberies, increase in economic spending, and a decrease in fatal car crashes. There's also a study in your packet showing public support to stop changing clocks and an overall preference for daylight savings time over standard time. Moving to daylight savings time requires action by the United States Congress. So even if we were to pass this bill, there would still be some things that would need to take place at the federal level. Congress will need to amend federal law to allow states to observe daylight savings time all year. Nationally, there's momentum to adopt year-round daylight savings time. So far, 19 states have enacted daylight savings time legislation. An additional 20 states are considering legislation this very year. On the West Coast, California voters authorized the change pending legislation, and both Oregon and Washington passed legislation in 2019 similar to the bill before you today. Year-round daylight savings time is also gaining traction in Canada, and the Yukon began full-time daylight savings time on March 8th, 2020. British Columbia passed legislation to implement year-round daylight savings time that is contingent on the U.S. West Coast also implementing it, as this bill does. Because of our close economic and geographic ties to the United States and Canadian West Coast, Alaska can avoid being left in the dark by passing HB 30. I am open for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Ortiz. Are there any questions? Representative Himschoot.
Thank you, Chair McCormick. My question is just to get a little more information on the changes in federal law that would be required. You mentioned it, but I need to hear it again.
Well, Congress has to authorize states to permanently go on to change their current way that they do time. So it's this bill, like other bills that have already been passed or attempts at passing legislation, it's always contingent on Congress giving final approval. I believe there was a Senate action that was taking place last year that was in support of daylight savings time year-round, but the House didn't take it up.
Follow-up, Representative Himschoot?
Through the chair. So Arizona and Indiana, what is their status?
They're on standard time.
They're on standard. So it would require congressional action to move to daylight savings time, but to stay on standard time is a state action.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair McCabe, did you have a question?
That was my question.
Okay. Rep. Ortiz, I don't mean to hit you with a gotcha here. So if you can't answer that, that's fine. But I'm curious if you could just, if you're familiar with what the original purpose was of daylight savings to begin with.
Sure, that was back during the time when we were a much more of a agrarian-based economy country, where a higher percentage of our people living in the United States were farmers, or short term, in other words, for simple term. And so basically the idea was that in order to gain more opportunity to take advantage of spending time in the fields, et cetera, that change for the summertime, daylight savings time, was an attempt to help them. And then I believe there was also some military implications, if I'm not mistaken. But I know for sure it was an adjustment based on the fact that we had much more of a percentage of our people who were making their primary living off of agriculture.
Thank you, Rep. Ortiz. This is kind of an interesting debate, I guess, that I've kind of looked into myself, and I didn't know that there was actually a agriculture component to it. In fact, I believe from what I've collected that that's mostly a kind of a myth, and that it actually is more so from World War II, if I'm not mistaken, and trying to ration resources, actually. So you often hear people say, oh, well, daylight savings is for farmers. Well, I'm not sure if that's completely true, but it seems like you do have information to the contrary, so I apologize for saying that, but I just think it's
No
an
problem.
interesting point to add to this discussion.
And I did mention the military component. Also.
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
real clear on how that was supposed to work during World War II, how that helped the situation, but I was aware of that as well.
Are there any further questions or comments from members for Rep. Ortiz? Rep. Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the chair, Representative Ortiz, can you speak to why on standard time people are bad? There's more robberies and car crashes per your studies you mentioned.
Well, through the chair, Representative Baker, I wouldn't want to imply that Representative Ortiz is any better of a person on daylight savings time than he is on standard time, or anybody else in the United States. It's just, I think the studies show evidently that when you have more daylight in the evenings, it's less likely to attract people to break into homes because you have you're more in the daylight, and it's harder to be discreet when you're doing these particular actions, and so it just limits the time when bad things can happen theoretically. And again, but studies do show that people who commit robberies, for example, they are looking for the cover of dark and the amount of, and I guess maybe they're not necessarily inclined to wake up really, really early to take advantage of the darkness on the other side. And so it just gives them less cover, if you will, is what the implication is.
Follow-up, Rep. Baker.
No follow. Thank you, Mr.
Vice Chair McCabe.
Thanks. So if I'm understanding this right, in Anchorage, and we're not in Anchorage right now, we're in Juneau, and you're from Ketchikan, and a lot of what I see is support from folks from the southeast. In Anchorage, in the wintertime, it would delay sunrise until 11:15 in the morning.
Absolutely. That's true. Well, let's see. Right? Yes, that is correct.
So the criminals would be able to get up at 7 a.m. and
Yeah.
have,
Sleep late and
5
still
hours of
pull off a robbery. Sleep late and still pull off a robbery.
Sorry, I forgot to run that through.
That's
CJ.
okay.
We got your question.
You know, through the chair, Representative McCabe, there's not, the way this would work in Alaska. I admit that far out in the western part of Alaska, they already have a late sunrise in the wintertime, and this would be an hour later. It probably wouldn't be as conducive, this kind of change for them, as it would be for other parts of the state. It doesn't hit everybody the same, and I'm fully in admittance of that.
Follow-up, Vice Chair McCabe.
So you and I are probably, through the chair, you and I are probably old enough to remember when there was 5 time zones in Alaska.
That's correct.
When I first moved up here, I used to fly out to Attu, and there was a significant time shift just flying that far. So this would sort of put us it's in line with the rest of the U.S. a little bit?
Through the chair, Representative McCabe, this particular change, if it were made, and again, just by the legislature and perhaps the governor signing this bill, it would still not put us on permanent daylight savings time. This would require congressional approval. But as I mentioned in my testimony, a number of states, first of all, the bill itself, similar to the daylight savings time bill that they looked at a number of years ago, is just in response to every fall and every spring I hear anyway, why do we have to keep doing this? This does not make sense. Why are we keep changing our time? So I hear a lot about that. So I think that there's broad support for just not changing our clocks. So then the question is, if there's broad support for that, what's better? Do we stay on daylight savings time or do we stay on standard time? It seems that the West Coast, most of the states, are moving in the direction of staying on daylight savings time. Now, if we were to choose the other option, and that would put us more at odds with the time changes that we are familiar with. Because if the West Coast stayed on daylight savings time, we're all familiar with the fact that we are 1 hour ahead of the West Coast. 1 hour behind? Yeah, 1 hour behind. There you go. 1 hour behind. We're all aware of that. If we were to stay on standard time and they were to go to daylight savings time, that would make it even more complicated than what it is right now. So this bill is in response to the larger trend of where the United States is going, and that's I know that in my region, it's particularly advantageous for the tourism industry in the summertime to have that extra hour of light in the evening, which they have now. This particular bill would just keep us on daylight savings time all year round. And so, there's advantages, there's disadvantages, but I think the main thing is that this bill is in support of what most of the states are doing across the United States, if they're acting at all on the issue of time.
Follow up, Vice Chair McCabe.
Thanks. I'm good.
Oh, Rep. Himschoot, or excuse me, Rep. McKay.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the chair, just more of a curiosity question. The whole world, like Europe, I don't even know or forgot if I ever did know. Does Europe do switch times back and forth? And then my second question is, a lot of people and a lot of businesses kind of key their work on the New York Stock Exchange.
Exactly.
So, in fact, there's businesses in Alaska, they show up at 5 o'clock in the morning because that's when the stock exchange opens in New York, and that's when they start trading, and that's their whole business. And I wondered if New York going to do this, or would they be switching back and forth and we'd be steady? There's a lot more to think about on these things than it meets the eye. And I just for conversation, I was just curious about that.
Through the chair,
In Nikkei, I was going to say in Tokyo, all these different London exchange, the Tokyo,
right.
how they would line up.
Are you prepared?
It may be beyond the scope here. I just
through the chair, Representative McCay, at this time, I don't have the specific answer for New York. However, in my testimony, if we were to make the change, right now, we are all year round a 4-hour difference between the East Coast and Alaska,
Right.
all the time. If this change were made and New York didn't make the change, the difference would be, for some of the years, there would be a 3-hour time difference, and for some of the year, there'd be a 4-hour time difference. So, in essence, on the exchange issue or international trade issue based out of New York, actually, it'd be a little bit easier for at least part of the year because we'd only be a 3-hour time difference.
I'll just note, having lived in Hawaii, having gone to school in Hawaii for about 2.5 years, they didn't observe daylight savings, and so there were parts of the year where there was 5-hour difference with the East Coast, 6-hour difference with the East Coast, and everything was fine. Nothing bad happened, so I think they're doing all right. No, just wanted to put that out there. Rep Himschoot.
Thanks. Through the chair, I'll just note that we have actually, the date line goes through our state, way out west, and it's the same number of hours of daylight. It's just where they fall in the human rhythm of it all. So whether it's morning or evening, more light. But my question is, through the chair, is there a federal action that would solve this for everyone? Like who's in charge here? We can make a change in Alaska similar to Arizona or Indiana on our own by staying with standard time. We could pass your bill saying that we want to be on daylight savings time, and then that would require federal action. Is there one simple action that the feds can do that changes it for all of us? Do they own the clocks?
Through the chair, Representative Himschoot, there may be the power, but I don't know that there's the desire to just unilaterally at the federal level make that kind of a decision. Like I said, through the chair, like I previously testified, the U.S. Senate did take action in support of daylight savings time last year. So in that sense, what they were doing is they were authorizing, it's my understanding that they weren't making a change for the country, they were just authorizing through their vote, those states that wanted to stay on daylight savings time could proceed in the manner that they were proceeding at the time. But there again, it ultimately didn't come to anything because the U.S. House didn't take that issue up.
Follow up, Rep Himschoot. Are there any further questions or comments from committee on HB 30? Hearing and seeing none, Rep Ortiz, do you have any closing comments you wanted to make before we conclude this morning?
Mr. Chairman, I just thank this committee for being here at 8 o'clock this morning to hear this particular bill. If this committee chooses to move this bill on, it's just the first step in a long road for this particular bill. And of course, the final decisions, those are off into the future, I'm sure, on the whole issue of whether this country, whether a number of states, et cetera, are going to make this kind of a change. And so nothing's imminent, but at the same time, we all know that through the process, we have to take our first steps, and I appreciate this committee to hearing this bill again as another small step to perhaps making this kind of change for Alaska. But ultimately, every one of you, like every other legislator and every other legislator at the federal level, has got to make the decision, is this in the best interest of, in this particular case, our state residents, and then of course, if it would happen across the country, is in the best interest of people. I do think that there is definitely strong interest in not changing it from spring to fall, just keeping it on one particular time. Now, I guess the debate is still out there whether it would be daylight savings time or standard time. But this bill is in support of what the states are doing currently at this time, particularly on the West Coast. And I thank you and every member of this committee for hearing this particular bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation this morning, Rep Ortiz. For the committee's awareness, we'll be taking this up again on Thursday, where we will be having public testimony. I'm going to go ahead and set an amendment deadline on this bill for tomorrow at 3:30. If for whatever reason that doesn't work, please just contact my office and we can work something out. Otherwise, we'll take up amendments Thursday. The community and read. The time is 8:22 a.m. and this hearing of the Community and Regional Affairs Committee is now adjourned.